Welcome to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast, your go-to resource for all things tennis coaching. Stay tuned for insightful discussions and practical tips that will make a real difference on and off the court.
Just how effective is basket drilling? How effective is drop feeding? How effective is unopposed practice? Welcome to a very hot My Tennis Coaching. My name is Steve Whelan. I hope you're all well. And last week we looked at Yannick Sinner and we shared a clip of Sinner at the French Open and his basket feeding. His coach was basket feeding him, and we asked the question, how efficient and effective is basket feeding? Well, today I'm going to share with you a study, a research paper that's released earlier this year on opposed versus unopposed practice. We are live, as always, on YouTube. So if you do have any questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions, please leave it in the chat as normal. It's been great over the past few weeks because we've had quite a lot of interaction live on the stream. So it's been great. So if you are joining us live, please do feel free to drop a question in the chat. So the paper we're going to look at today is by Tom E. Perry and colleagues on unopposed practice versus opposed practice. So unopposed practice means there's no opponent. And in tennis terms, that's your basket feeding, your hand feeding, your drop feeding, your isolated practice, your closed practice. Opposed practice is where obviously there's an opponent. So a live opponent on the far side of the net. So this paper was released in March 2025. It isn't an experimental paper. It draws on a lot of theory and research and evidence from other practitioners within ecological dynamics. And it sort of argues the case of, well, opposed versus unopposed practice. Because in last week's stream, we talked about this quite a bit. And I said, well, there's lots of evidence out there to show that opposed practice is more beneficial than unopposed practice. So for what I'll do this week is start off the podcast with just sharing the paper. The paper is in the link of the show notes and the description. So if you are interested in having a look and a read of the paper yourself, please do so. But we're going to get into it. So all I've done is I've just pulled out some quotes from the paper itself. And we're just going to sort of talk through sort of what the quotes mean, what they represent, and the impact it has on us as tennis coaches. So just let me bring this up. So I think the first bit there is like unopposed practice. The perception of unopposed practice is it's really good for learning. So when we have unopposed practice, it's ideal because we take away all the pressure, we take away all the stress of having a live opponent within the situation, and we can develop the skill. So there's a assumption out there that unopposed practice is really, really good for skill development. And when you're trying to teach, let's say, a forehand to a beginner, if you strip away all of that variability and the stress and the anxiety, it's ideal. For me, it's all about control and comfort. So when coaches reduce the chaos, when they take away their opponents, they're just taking control of the situation. They're bringing a level of comfort to the learner because they're just giving the learner one thing to think about. They just have to think about the technique, and they just have to think about how they're moving. They don't have to think about their opponents or the impact that their shot has on their opponents. So we strip away a lot of variability, and we'll talk about variability a bit later on in the paper. And we have this perception of, well, if we strip everything away and we do basket feeding or we do hand feeding, then that's where the skill develops. So we can learn the fundamentals, we can learn the basics of the skill. And I understand that assumption. And we understand that assumption comes from very early motor learning research and skill development, things like Fitz and Posner, Stages of Learning, books like the 10,000 Repetitions and Deliberate Practice. So what we have to understand is motor learning, perception development it's still pretty early on in its infancy in terms of science and research. Like perceptual development has only been really sort of pushing on over the past 20, 40 years. So I get the assumption of if you isolate skill, it makes it better. And we then focus on the shape or the movement, and then we try and smooth it and then develop it into skill. And it feels like there's progress being made. because even on like coach education courses, we go from like a drop feed to a hand feed to a racket feed, then to a variable feed. So we go from like block feeding to variable feeding. So there's like, even within coach education, there's this element of you break everything down into very small parts, and then you start to layer on the complexity. You add in variability. So that all creates this illusion of learning. What we sort of will look at in this paper, well, the learning is actually minimal, if at all. It doesn't actually develop an awful lot of skill. So it creates this false sense of progress. It creates this false confidence. Again, a lot of coaches say to me, well, I'll do basket drilling to build confidence in players, especially beginners. So we build their confidence up with the movement. And again, that's a huge assumption, because when you put the beginner into a chaotic environment, that confidence disappears very quick. It's false confidence. It's very fragile. And the moment you introduce any pressure, aka an opponent, then it falls, then it starts to fall apart. So sorry, I'm just having trouble here with my screen for some reason. So what we have to understand is, well, when we are stripping away, when we do basket feeding, when we do hand feeding, we strip away all really important information. So the quote from the paper there is, practicing in opposed environments removes key information variables that are necessary I can't say it, for coordinated movement and performance. Like, they're vital. Like, when you take away your opponent, you take away all the information that's really valuable. Because when we hit, again, I'll use a forehand as an example. When I hit the forehand, it's not the mechanics, it's not the technique that dictates whether I'm successful or not. It's the information from the environment. Because my opponent's position is going to affect the type of forehand I hit. And again, there's no such thing as a forehand. You have multiple different forehands. You have forehands when you're attacking, forehands when you're defending, forehands from the center of the court, forehands when you're wide, forehands when you're deep, forehands when you're short, and they're all different. They all have different variability and different movements. So when you remove the information, the player doesn't actually know how to hit the ball, really, because again, when we play tennis again is a relatively simple game. We put the ball into a position that makes your opponent miss. If there's no opponent, then I don't know where to put the ball into that position. We remove all that valuable information. And people might say, yeah, but if I'm basket feeding, at least I can stand in a realistic position. And this, again, has become quite common in coach education for the past few years. Okay, basket feeding's okay if you feed from a tactically relevant position and you feed a tactically relevant ball. Great for that one shot. But the chances are, when you feed that ball into your opponent, into your player, and they hit the ball towards their fake opponent, well, the next shot's going to be different, because it's going to go from a different part of the court. The impact of your player's shot on their opponent will change their opponent's shot as well. So when we start getting into basket feeding, it's so fake, because not only do you strip away the intention, but then also you strip away the cause and effect. So when you're mass feeding or block feeding forehand after forehand, every forehand you hit will have a cause and effect on their opponent. It will have an effect on their opponent's position, an effect on the opponent's ball they send back. It will then affect your decision making, your problem solving, and it creates this false sense of security of repetition. Again, you never hit the same forehand twice in a row, ever. Again, there's a famous quote from Nadal where he says, for the millions of tennis balls, in theory, I should never miss. Well, yeah, because if we have this idea of repetition being really important, think about how many millions of tennis balls Nadal has hit in his career. So why does he still miss? Oh, he still miss because the game's full of variability. So we strip it all away. We strip away all the information, and therefore we get this movement that's just developed in isolation. But it's not just your opponent, but it's things like the score. Like, the score is really, really important, because again, I will hit my forehand differently 40 love up than I will love 40 down. There's going to be different emotion, different behavior in that. So when you strip away your opponent's position, you strip away the score, you strip away the cause and effect, you strip away everything that's really essential for the skill. And I get this question all the time, what's the difference between technique and skill? Well, technique is a single movement. Like, me lifting my cup up is a technique. Me lifting my cup up and holding different parts in different ways, that's skill. It's adaptable, it changes. So I think it's really, really important that we understand that when we strip away information, that we strip away everything that makes a skill. So it's really important for coaches to understand that when we strip away all that information, that we actually take away all the vital parts. And I say this a lot when I do coach education, like the learning is not done in the demo. Your players do not learn how to play tennis through your demonstration. They don't learn through your instructions. They learn through interaction and their relationship with the game. They learn by playing. So when you strip away all that information from the environment, they're not learning anything. They're just learning how to move a racket in a moment in time that the chances are will never actually appear in a match. So we think that information, we think opponents, we think score, we think that's all really dangerous and really difficult for beginners. But that's probably the most vital part of the jigsaw that the players need, especially beginners. They need all that information. So by stripping it away, we actually harm player development. And I said it on a podcast, or might have been a blog post a few weeks back. Like, I started working with this group of red players recently. They've been all having lessons for 5-6 months, and they've come to me as a performance group, and they can't play tennis. They literally can't play tennis. They can't serve. They can't play points. So I'm not saying rally, but they can't play points. Like, literally, if the ball is put in a challenging position, they miss straight away. What they can do really well is if I hit the ball to them, they can hit the ball back. If I hit the ball to them, they can hit the ball back. But tennis is about that. I mentioned it before on the podcast. Tennis is about putting the ball in a position where your opponent can't get the ball back. So as soon as these kids are challenged with a little bit of movement, it breaks down. So my challenge to the coaching team is like, well, these kids can't play tennis. Like, what have they been doing for 6 months? They've been standing still, being hand fed, either by a coach or each other. And they're really good at standing still. But when they're put in an environment and their opponent is getting them off balance, but also they're trying to off balance their opponents, they can't play because they don't know what information to use from the opposite side. They can't deal with score pressure, and it all falls apart. So we strip away information. And again, this paper just highlights that as well. Like, when we strip away opponents, score, and stuff like that, we just strip away all the vital parts. This is a great quote from it as well. Skill learning is viewed as a process of adapting perception action couplings to affordances within specific performance environments. Now, there's quite a lot of heavy academic words in there. So perception action, in simple terms, is your ability to see and react to the ball. So in information processing, we'll probably call it ready, read, react. But what we understand from an ecological lens is we don't actually process information quite like that. We basically see the world and we act upon what we see. We act on stuff in real time. We don't pull from memory. We don't remember movements as such. We don't pull how to hit a forehand from the database from the brain. Like, we don't pull information from the brain. What we do from an ecological lens is we react in real time to what's in the environment. And that's what we call affordances. So affordances are opportunities for behavior or opportunities for action. And we see affordances all around us. So at the moment, it's really warm in this room. I'm pretty hot. Okay. So my intention is I need a drink. So I know there's a water bottle here. So that's an affordance. So my intention will bring my attention towards a water bottle. Again, what a lovely Asics water drop water bottle. So I have invitations for action within the environment. I have a microphone. I have a computer. I've got a little keyboard here, which I press buttons to change the scene. Okay. Affordances. I've got a chair that affords sitting on. So we need information within the environment because we need invitations. We need invitations to take action. So when we have unopposed practice and we strip away all those invitations, the players don't become very sensitive to it. So those red players I was talking about before, like, they have invitations for action, but when they're being fed a ball. So the invitation is they understand there's a feeder and they understand the ball's going to come from the feeder straight to them. So they get really good and really sensitive to that information. So they can perceive and act in that situation. When they then come to me and it's more chaotic and there's an opponent trying to beat them, they don't know what information to use. They can't relate what they see and hear and feel in the environment to what action they need to do. And that's where it looks like they can't play tennis. So that perception action coupling is vital, because we use our perceptual system all the time to make decisions, and our actions are the decisions. Like, we just act to perceive sometimes as well. So I know that's quite a lot of academic stuff, but skill emerges in real time in the real environment. You don't pull it from memory. You don't pull it from past experience as such. You do remember key affordances. You do remember key opportunities for action. So we don't process stuff like we are, as we were meant to believe, with information processing theory. And information processing theory came around when the computers were born. So it's a really easy metaphor to explain how we move and act through the world, because people were sort of getting into that kind of things. That's where things like memory and processing comes from. The brain doesn't process. The brain is part of an organ, as part of a system that self-organizes. Again, I don't want to go too deep into the academics here, but what I'm sort of trying to do is prove the point that when you strip away information, you actually stop how the human system is trying to interact with the world, and you then stop the sensitivity. We are live, and obviously there's a couple of comment stuff coming in now, which is great. So please feel free to leave any questions or comments. So if you are just joining us halfway through, we're talking about unopposed versus opposed practice. We are looking at a research paper, which I've left down in the description. So we're just talking about the benefits and so-called not benefits of basket feeding. So what we need to do is repeat without repeating. So repetition without repetition. If you are familiar with this channel, I talk about this all the time. We have to understand that a forehand has to be a functional movement. It has to have an intention. It has to have a purpose. And like I said before, the most basic intention in tennis to teach our players is hit the ball in a position where your opponent can't get it back. It's not about a C shape or falling over your shoulder or a split step. Like, that's not functional movements. Obviously, things like that can help the function, but sometimes those things aren't even needed. I've talked about this quite recently as well. Like, you don't need a split step at red. Why we teach a split step at red, I don't know. You don't need to do it. You're just adding more chaos into an already chaotic environment. And what we have to understand, that functional movement and that variability is really key. If you, again, there's lots of papers out there and stuff, and we talked about this when we did the Bernstein podcast. Like, a skilled, experienced performer, player in our case, they are more variable in their movement than a beginner. A beginner is less variable, and they'll have the same action over and over again. But our misconception and our assumption as tennis coaches is, well, a beginner, you need to learn consistent movement. You need to learn the C shape over and over again. If you repeat it 10,000 times, you get really good at it. That's not what skill is. Again, look at Djokovic. There's a great couple of clips I've got on my Instagram at my tennis coaching of Djokovic hitting forehands. Like, every forehand he hits is different. It's completely different. And he is unbelievably adaptable. If you want to look at the most prime example of a adaptable tennis player in the world, look at Djokovic. Every single shot he hits different. Every single stance is different. Every single shot he hits is based on what he sees in the environment, and he adapts, and it's a functional environment based on his intention. So again, I mentioned before, like, we don't have a forehand. If I hit a forehand down the line and I'm attacking, it's going to be different if I hit a defensive forehand cross court and high. The movement's different. Everything about that forehand is different. So intention drives our movement. And then, so therefore, we need players to be functional. So when we're looking at developing a forehand, we need high repetition, because we do need repetition to get better, but we need repetition without repetition. So what does that mean? How can we repeat without repeating? Well, this was Bernstein's idea around his now famous blacksmith study. Well, we need to have the same outcome or the same intention, but we need to be able to do it in multiple different ways. So Bernstein had the expert blacksmith who would hit the hammer, but how they moved the hand and the hammer to the nail was completely variable, but the contact was quite similar. So again, with our forehands, we need kids to be able to hit forehands out wide, from deep positions, from short positions, to be able to drive it, hit with topspin, hit with slice. And that's at all levels. So those kids said before, at the red level, they're really good at standing still and being fed a ball, but they don't have any adaptability. Because they've been taught with no variability. It's really fake. And like some coaches go, yeah, but I can get variability in basket feeding now because I can feel like a quick one, a slow one, a high one, a slice one. The problem with that is twofold. Number one, it becomes very predictable, very quick, because again, the coaches will have some type of sequence, even if they are trying to be random. And I know this, I've done that myself. But also, it's not variability, because even though you're feeding variable, when your player's hitting the ball back, there's no cause and effect, because if I hit the ball really deep and flat and drive you back, that has an impact on your next shot. Therefore, that has an impact on my next shot. If there's no cause and effect in your practice, if it's closed and unopposed, it's fake. So then, therefore, it goes back to that sensitivity about the information. So if I play against you now, and I use that example, if I push you deep and push you back behind the baseline, I will creep forwards because I know there's a good chance that ball's going to come short next. Because I can see it. I can see you being jammed up. I can see you under stress, and I can see you under pressure. That's going to impact my decision making for the next shot. If you practice that in isolation with a basket, you don't get any of that, because you're not even bothered about your shot. And like, how many tennis coaches have you watched over the years? And I've been guilty of this as well. So this is me sort of making fun of myself a little bit. But like, the coach is feeding and the ball's flying out, and the coach going, yeah, good shot. Yeah, I love the top spin. And the ball's flying up down the back. So therefore, the player, again, using that perception action coupling, no idea if it's the right way of hitting it, because they're just focused on the mechanics of it. So when we're talking about developing technique, like, we've got to think about, no, it's functional movement. I call it skill to the kids. Like it has to be skill, but it has to be intentional. It has to be with a purpose as well. So we need to develop movement, functional movement, repetition without repetition. And again, that's just backed up in this paper as well. And this is a really important one. So the opposition provides crucial affordances and contextual information that are absent in unopposed settings. So we've touched upon this quite a lot before. So when we have the situation where, let's say, two kids are feeding each other, when they're feeding each other, again, we're taking away really, really vital information. We're taking away where the ball's coming from, what situation their opponent's in. We talked about it. We're taking away the cause and effect. If we get our players playing, so even if you've got two under sixes and they're playing floor tennis, there's so much rich information from the environment in that situation. They are developing the perception action coupling. They're working out those invitations for action, affordances, and they're learning how to sort of engage and interact with the game. It might not be tennis as we know it, over the net and hitting the ball with heavy topspin, but it's still sending and receiving the ball. And it goes back to like throwing and catching. So when you throw and catch, it's different information. It's different information and it's different action. So we talk about perception action. The information's different because when I release the ball, when I'm throwing it, I would generally throw it from inside the body. I'm not going to throw out to the side like I do a forehand or a backhand. I'm also going to throw in a completely different way than I strike the ball. So the ball's going to travel through the air differently as well. So the contact's different, the path of the racket's different, the actual ball is different. And I get coaches, and again, this is me guilty of this as well. I get why coaches think it's similar, because it's a low to high action. It must be similar. So, and because it's actually a little bit slower as well, but that information is different. So again, we talk about sensitivity to the player being used to seeing these opportunities, perception. Pardon me. The action is different then as well, because when I catch, I'll catch inside the body because it's the easiest way for me to catch. It's really difficult for me to catch out to the side. It's really tough. So the body will again want to be efficient and effective. I want to catch in here. Therefore, my movement's going to be different. How I approach the ball is going to be different. I also then have to wrap my fingers around the ball, which is really difficult, a very difficult motor skill. And then I've got to throw the ball back. But when I throw the ball back, I've got time to actually look around, and you may think that's a good thing. But when you then put a racket in the hand of the player, it's different action. It's a different skill. So you just wasted 20 minutes throwing and catching. And now you put a racket in the hand, and now you're starting from scratch again. And that's why you see that disconnect. So when you get the players throwing and catching, you think, yeah, they've got it. Let's progress onto the racket. And when you introduce the racket, it all falls apart. And you go, what happened there? It's a different skill. It's a different perceptual awareness. It's a different action as well. Let me take a sip of my water. And I get why that's controversial, because I seen a post today on Instagram, and there was a good caption. The caption was like, we don't teach technique, we play the game. It's like, I love that. I'm all for that. But then when you watch the video, everyone's throwing and catching. You're not playing the game. You're playing a game of throw and catch, but you're not playing tennis. We have to understand when we decompose, when we break down skill, like, okay, throwing and catching, that leads on to hitting. The different skills, they don't transfer. So when we take away all the information, we take away what's relevant. And this sort of ties in quite nicely to the next quote from the paper. Like, even at early stages of development, appropriately simplified but representative tasks are preferential to decontextualized drills. So what that means is, again, we have this assumption of starting simple. We'll start simple, then make it complex. So we'll start both throwing. Oh, sorry, maybe we'll start both rolling on the floor. Then we'll go both throwing. Then we'll go one throwing, one hitting. Then we might go both hitting. And the idea is, well, you develop the skill in the simple context, and then you start to like upskill it. But what we just talked about in the previous sort of slide is, well, skill doesn't work that way. Skill emerges based on the situation in real time. So throwing and catching are different skills to hitting and sending and receiving of a racket. So all those times I've spent thousands of hours probably at this point practicing an overarm throw to develop the serve, pretty much wasted in terms of actual skill of the serve. Now, what throwing and catching is really good for is physical literacy and like developing strength and coordination and all that stuff, which is really good because that will then affect the player's action capacity or the individual constraints, and that will then give them more invitations for action. So I'm not saying that throwing and catching is a waste of time completely in certain context. If you're developing physical literacy skills, great. But if you're developing tennis skills, it's kind of a waste of time. So if you've got kids coming to you once a week, there's no point throwing and catching because you're not going to make a big impact. You've got a better chance getting them to hit straight away and getting to hit with an opponent, getting to play a game of tennis. Pardon me, dry throat today. So even like if you've got complete beginners, play floor tennis, play tennis with a balloon, something that involves some element of sending and receiving, some element of trying to get your opponent off balance. And you could do multiple touches, multiple bounces. I really struggle when coaches go to me, you can't do it with beginners. You can. That's what coaching is. Coaching is trying to find what the player is capable of. And you've got to meet the player where they're at. And you've got to design your practices that slightly challenge the player. But what we do is we panic. We panic in the chaos and then we strip everything away. We strip away their opponent. We strip away the variable ball coming in. We strip away movement and we then go into the basket. But there's no evidence and research to show that actually going into the basket is beneficial in terms of then developing more complex and dynamic skills. If anything, the evidence and research shows us it doesn't transfer. The transfer of learning is minimal. So why would you spend 20 minutes throwing and catching? Why would you spend 20 minutes basket feeding when the transfer is not there? It's minimal. I spent 18 years doing it. And it used to, again, this is one of the reasons why I started to question coaching methods and look at alternative methodologies. Like, why would you do it? Because every time I did it, when I put it into a dynamic situation, it would disappear. The skill would disappear. I would spend an hour working on my player's forehand and it disappears in a match. Like all those lovely C shapes and follow over the shoulder disappears. And it's again because it's a different skill. And it's crazy because like we don't really educate people on this on Coach Ed. We almost go down the information processing route. And this is just my opinion, by the way, because obviously I work in coach education. But we do it in a way, in my opinion, because it's easy. It's easy if you've got a very inexperienced coach. Surely just giving you something's better than nothing. Surely allowing you to basket feed is better is better than sort of this chaotic environment. But I disagree. Like, with most inexperienced coaches, they'll have an understanding of the game of tennis at some level, whether that be a club level, county, regional, national. So they know how to play the game of tennis. So just start with that. Like, if you know nothing about tennis coaching, if you're just a new coach starting out, just play matches. Just play matches and just see where the players win and lose points. And where they're losing points, can you help them? Can you help them and maybe look at what decisions they're making in those moments, what information they're using, and then you just guide them to better information. So again, a great example is if a player is pushed out wide and they're off balance, they really shouldn't be trying to hit a winner down the line. So then you may try and manipulate the game where you encourage them to go cross court and higher. I don't think that's a more difficult way of coaching. If anything, I think it's easier. I think what makes it more complicated is when we give coaches really complex frameworks and lesson structures. And we always go back to the basket. Everything goes back to the isolated practice. Even in 2025, most federations around the world, it's all about, we start off with a basket drill. We develop the skill in a closed setting, and then we progress it and add in variability. There's loads of evidence and research in this paper is one of them to show it's not that effective. If anything, it's ineffective, and it doesn't transfer into more complex situations. What we can do, and we maybe look at this in a future podcast, is we just scale it. We just scale it down. We reduce some of the variability. We make the ball smaller. We make the court smaller. We make the racket smaller. We make the net lower. We've got all those tools. It's called mini tennis or tennis 10s or LTA youth, whatever federation you currently work under. That's why we shrink it down. What we shouldn't do is we shouldn't take the game out of it. So decontextualize is when you take the context away. So when you take away the opponent, when you take away the score, you take away the game. They're not playing tennis no more. And I had this recently with a parent. I can't remember if I told the story in the podcast or not. I do repeat myself quite a lot, so apologies. But like, I had a parent complain about my lessons recently, and they were saying, well, like, it's not real coaching. And I even had a player last night challenge it a little bit. So let me tell the story of last night. So the player, the task is to volley back the serve. So the idea is, I serve and you can't let the ball bounce in the box. So the intention of the drill is for the server. I want the server to start developing racket head speed and start to jam up their opponent by serving or trying to find space in the box. So that's the intention. And the kid who got stressed was the returner, and the server was winning every point, and the kid got really stressed, like, oh, it's stupid. In tennis, like, you lose the point if you volley. And I'm like, yeah, I understand that. But we're not in a performance environment here. We're not playing a tournament. We're in a learning environment, and we're trying to develop skill. I'm trying to bring awareness to the server. I didn't say a lot of this, but I'm trying to bring perceptual action to the server. Like, look at the returner's position, use that information to help you serve with intent. And they couldn't understand it because it doesn't look like tennis. But then the same player would go on court afterwards with a basket of ball and serve into an empty service box. And my challenge there was, well, which one looks more like tennis? The one we've just done with there's a server and returner, and we've just slightly changed the rules. Again, granted, not allowed to do it in a real match, but we're not in a real match. We're learning. Or your situation now, where you've got no returner, you've got no score, and it's just you on your own. Which one looks and feels more like tennis? And you were like, yeah, I think what we did in session looks more like tennis. And that's the mad conception in it. Like, when we do basket drilling, people think that's real coaching, but we're actually not coaching the game. So when you look at it from an ecological dynamics or ecological psychology or constraint-led approach, when we have an opponent and it's live sessions, it's opposed practice, it looks and feels like tennis. But again, the misconception of players and parents and coaches is, oh, no, that's not tennis coaching. Tennis coaching's a basket. Tennis coaching's demos and explicit instructions and developing the skill. That's not tennis. And hopefully listen to this podcast, and when you read the paper, again, links in the description, you understand that the game is actually a great teacher. And we need to get away from this misconception of we start off small and then we add complexity. We start off small, but we make the game smaller. We use a smaller court, a slower ball, smaller rackets, called mini tennis. It's been around for 20 odd years. We don't strip away everything that makes the game tennis. Again, when you take the racket away, it's not tennis no more. When there's no opponent, it's not tennis no more. Yeah, it's just a racket and ball. You're just hitting the ball into an empty space. And we hopefully at the start of the podcast, we talked about how important that information is. We are coming towards the end. So if you do have any questions and comments, please do feel free to leave them in the chat. Like, this is a great opportunity to talk about basket drilling. And maybe if you are a keen basket driller, maybe leave in a chat, like, why, like, what's your rationale? What's your theory behind it? And this is not to say like basket drilling is 100% wrong. Like, people still do it. I've not done it for a while because I don't see the value in it. And hopefully like research papers like this show you that there's a little value. And what's really interesting is a lot of tennis coaches don't even know this information's out there. A lot of tennis coaches don't realize that there's a lot of research and evidence in skill acquisition in this very field, what we do as coaches. And we just rely on federations and national governing bodies and CPD. But we have to understand a lot of that CPD is based in information processing theory, again, which is now 60 odd years old. It's also based on making things really simple for coaches to understand and take out. And again, this is my own personal opinion, no reflection on any federation or governing body, but I also think that a lot of federations, like, they just want facilitators. They just want people to deliver tennis activity. Like, true coaching is actually developing performance. It's actually developing a player to play a match properly. And I think sometimes we just want facilitators, like level 1s, level 2s, sometimes even level 3s. It's just, okay, let's get on call and deliver something. Something's better than nothing. But more often than not, it's actually not. Like, doing a basket drill has little value in skill acquisition. So doing a basket drill is not better than nothing. Sometimes you're better just playing tennis. You're better just playing the game itself. And it's something that I'm working a little theory of mine at the moment. Is like, how much damage is coaching doing? And again, that's not being harsh on the coaches, because coaches only know what they know, and coaches only deliver sessions and how they're educated. But if coaches around the world are still doing basket drilling, and we know it's not very good for players, how much damage is that doing? Because when players go play a match and they can't play, they leave the sport. Like, fast food is convenient. Fast food's tasty. It's really good. But too much fast food is not good for you. So we shouldn't simplify it and break the game down. We have to keep the game into some context. And this is a good one here. And I just touched upon it there. Like, practitioners, in our case, tennis coaches, should critically evaluate whether practices support transfer to competition. The biggest thing to do as a coach, if you're listening to this podcast, you're watching the stream, when you do your basket drill and you put it into a match at the end, look how much transfers. If nothing transfers, that shows you that the basket drill was not very efficient and effective. It's not a case of repetitions, like, oh, we need more reps. It's not a case that the player's not focused or they're not trying. Again, I watched a session the other week where the coach did a whole session on basket drilling, puts the player into a session. Player can't repeat the action, can't repeat the functional movement. And the coach then starts saying, you're not focused, you're not trying hard enough, you're putting no effort in. The player couldn't do it. They didn't have the skill. They couldn't deal with the variability. They lost confidence. So when you lose confidence, you stop moving. When you lose confidence, it looks like you're not bothered. And it's a case of, well, the coach, you need to look at like what you've just done. And you've gone from literally isolated practice into match play. And you're wondering why it doesn't work. And you're wondering why the player now looks and appears that they're not interested. They're absolutely shot with confidence. And it goes back to that fragile element of confidence. Yes, you can build confidence in a basket setting. When you put it into a match situation, when you realize you can't do it under pressure, that confidence disappears as well. So, and that's what I got to. I mean, I've told the story a million times, I'm not going to repeat it. But 5 years ago, like, just fed up with my players not transferring. And I blame the players. The players don't try hard enough. They're mentally weak. It must be psychology. And that's led me down this very big rabbit hole of, okay, well, let's look at the science. What does the science actually say? Let's look at psychology. Let's look at human behavior. And that's a bit I always come back to. Like, I am in a human behavior business. I work with humans. I need to understand how humans interact with the world. And it's not a computer. And someone made a great observation the other day. Like sometimes as tennis coaches, again, guilty as charged. I believe there's like the Matrix. During the Matrix where Neo, Keanu Reeves, he needs to learn Kung Fu. So they just plug something into his brain where he learned Kung Fu in like 10 seconds. Like we believe that's how it works with skill. If we obviously can't plug anyone in just yet, Elon Musk. But like if we just give the skill, if we just repeat the skill over and over again, it gets stored in the brain. Well, it doesn't actually work that way. And I think a lot of the time we do basket drilling, we do hand feeding, and we make it look really good. And I think sometimes it's a show for parents. Okay, look how quick and how good I can get your child to play in a very small amount of time. But then we hide away the match play. We hide away the dynamic points at the end because we know it doesn't survive. And that's why you see a lot of coaches don't play matches in lessons. You'll see a lot of coaches shy away from the serve. You'll see a lot of coaches spend a lot of time playing fun games like Cross the River and Jailbreak. Again, isolated practices. Because once you put the kid into a dynamic tennis situation, aka a match, if that skill hasn't transferred, that's quite damning, not on the players, but on the coach. And that was me for 18 years. So there we have it. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast. A little bit different. I feel a bit like Rob Gray today. Like Rob Gray is the absolute GOAT. Obviously, I've not got his academic understanding of reading papers, but I have left the description down below. I have left in the description down below the paper. So if you are interested in reading the full paper yourself, please do check it out. And if you do like this type of podcast, let me know, and I'll sort of unpack some more papers as well. And of course, papers do have bias. Like people who wrote that paper are very much in ecological dynamics world. So there is a bias in all papers you read. And that's why people say, yeah, but there's a paper on information processing. There's a great paper I got sent this week, actually. I won't say who sent it to me, but someone sent me a paper on muscle memory, and the paper was published by the ITF. It was published 7 years ago. I think it was published in 2018, but a full paper on muscle memory. So like you can find this paper on most things, and that's what I mean. Like, there is a bias, and I'm going to be honest, there are biased in papers. But I'd probably challenge you to find the paper that compares opposed and unopposed practice, and it shows that unopposed wins. Most papers show that unopposed practice wins all the time. So there is always bias in papers as well, and there's always bias in practitioners and psychologists. Like I get into lots of conversations on LinkedIn with cognitive psychologists all the time, who are obviously, they make a living from information processing and cognitive behavior therapy and stuff like that. So I understand why they're quite strongly on that field. Again, they're biased as there. Obviously, I have a bias within ecological dynamics, but the way I think, not that I'm unique, but I have coached both ways. I've coached in an information processing cognitive way. I've also coached in an ecological way, and I see the difference. I see the difference not only in the players, but me as a coach. Like I see the difference in the players, both in the lessons, but also performance on the match court as well. Like my players don't cry under stress as much anymore. They still get upset because it's emotional. My players are great problem solvers and decision makers. Technically, they're a little bit unique. Yeah, they're a little bit all over the place, but they win points. They win tennis matches. And that's ultimately what my job is. My job is to win tennis matches. I'm not a rhythmic gymnastics coach, and my job is to get you to do perfect form to score a 10 at the Olympics. My job is to get you to win tennis points, whether that be at a club level or whether that be county or regional level as well. We do have a couple of questions and comments coming in, so we will have a little look at them. So I'm just going to share them on the screen. I'll read them out. So Frank, good to speak to you, Frank. Thanks for joining us. Frank is a member of my tennis coach academy. So it might be a little bit biased here as well, but it's fine. So Frank, I used to do this drill where the player served and I would just stand in front of the player and hand feed him the next ball. I'm laughing because it's the most common drill ever, regardless of whether the ball went into the empty box or not. Yuck. I actually seen that done by a national governing body and sent out in the CPD recently. And it was classed as constraint-based coaching. So constraints was a bit like what you did there. You get the player to serve into a box, then you hand feed the next ball. That next ball's not coming, like if the serve goes out. Also, the next ball's coming from a completely unrealistic position. Like that next ball is determined cause and effect on the serve. Like if you serve out wide, the next ball potentially is coming back middle or wide. It's not going to go line generally if it's quick. Again, I don't know because it's highly variable. So just having a returner down the far end makes a huge difference. But yeah, I've been guilty of that drill as well. My favorite one of that one was when you would get them to hit a serve and then you'd throw the ball up like a drive volley for developing racket head speed. You see it done all the time in Instagram reels and stuff. But yeah, I'm not too keen on that one. But glad that you've changed your way of thinking. And Colin, thanks Colin for the comment. I play a normal game but change the rules so where if the first serve is not returned, the server immediately wins the game. Yeah, just constraints. Just trying to find ways of encouraging, manipulating behavior of the player is absolutely key. And I think we're all good at constraints because, like, again, this is another thing that kind of annoys me at the moment. Like people are saying, oh, I've always been constraint-led coach. I've always put constraints in. Well, a basket drill is a constraint. Like a basket drill is a constraint. It's highly overly constrained, but it is a constraint. Like adding rules in, like Colin and Frank there, he's put rules in. It is constraint-led coaching. I think the bit that gets missed with constraint-led coaching is the psychology behind it, the ecological dynamics, especially when it comes in relation to sport. Like ecological dynamics is probably more important than the constraints themselves. Like understanding what the perception action coupling is, understanding that to move, players need information from the environment, and to understand things like affordances, like invitations for action, like what is an affordance. And I've just in the process of writing a article and paper on affordances that I'm hoping will get published by a tennis organization. So watch out for that as well. But listen, thanks so much for joining in a really, really hot and sticky day today here in the UK. As always, please do check out mytenniscoaching.com. If you are watching the replay on YouTube, check out the video on the screen at the end. And any suggestions on future podcasts, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast as well, and whether that be a guest if you are ecologically minded or if you're traditionally minded and you love a basket drill and we want to have a bit of a chat and a debate around basket drilling, I'm open. Again, this is not about saying right and wrong. This is about just sharing evidence and sharing research. More importantly, sharing my journey. And I say it all the time. It's called My Tennis Coaching because it's my coaching journey. I've gone 18 years from loving the basket drill and biomechanics and isolated practice to the past 5-6 years exploring a whole new methodology. And sometimes that methodology is complex with things like affordances and stuff, but it is just sharing my opinion, my research. So it's not a case of me downplaying or threatening tennis coaches. Until next time, have a great week and I'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update.